Namaste. Welcome to Urban Chatterati. And today I'm back with Abhijit Iyer-Mitra to discuss the peace process between India and Pakistan. Abhijit, welcome back.
Very well. Thanks for having me on.
Always a pleasure. So, Abhijit, tell us something about what is this recent peace process going on between India and Pakistan. It seems that things are moving on a fast pace, which basically tells us that the groundwork was being laid for the past couple of years. So, what has been happening as of now?
See, it's many things coming together, right? There's been speculation that the UAE has played an active role in peacemaking, which everybody in the UAE bureaucracy seem to tell me is completely wrong. That it's a passive role in. Uh, they never expected peacemaking, and imagine when the UAE warns you to be careful about Pakistani peacemaking, right? So there's absolutely no active role out there. What we're seeing is a confluence of pressures that has come to bear. The UAE is owed $1 billion, which the Pakistanis have not been able to pay. And day before yesterday, their IMF loan got approved for $1.36 billion, most of which will be used to service the UAE loan. So now they're in that situation of what in the Punjab, in the rural belt, we call Chakradhari debt. It's cyclic debt where you have to keep borrowing at ever more fantastical interest rates to pay off your old debts. And you're not even paying off the capital, you're still paying off the interest. It's becoming very problematic for these people now. Because on the one hand, they've antagonized China but by not moving fast enough on CPEC. And if you remember, we've spoken about this in the last 4 or 5 years, Abhinav. You would have remembered me telling you this almost 4 years back, when we had started picking up signs of discontent in China about Pakistan. All the Chinese language journals were complaining that, the land acquisition isn't happening and things like that, which we all know because the landlords control Pakistan. It's that landlord military, so-called industrialist nexus. And for them, land is property. Land is their primary source of wealth. So they always want to give it out for permanent rent in that sense, rather than just sell it off. Plus, any kind of industrialization that happens the way the Chinese envisaged it goes against their own interests. You don't want the creation of a middle class in Pakistan. So there was a lot of sense of desperation in Pakistan. They thought they would use they would play off the Chinese against the Americans and get American soft loans. But then the Americans under Trump said, you know what, screw you, we're not biting on this crap. So the deeper they went into Chinese debt. And isn't it surprising that the complaints about Pakistan start off exactly when Trump gets elected? Because America says, we're not biting on this crap anymore. Biden clearly is biting on that crap, which is why that IMF loan has been sanctioned somewhat. He's not completely sold on it yet. So the financial situation has been one aspect of it. The second situation has been the rapprochement between Saudi Arabia, the UAE, and India. India and UAE always got along fine, but the UAE was never willing to take any diplomatic initiative unless Saudi Arabia heralded it. Because the unspoken rule in the GCC was that Saudi Arabia was the leader and the rest of the GCC will follow. And this, was the genesis of the Qatar GCC fallout, that Qatar decided, no, Saudi Arabia is not going to be our leader. So what's happened there is it's also the sense of abandonment. Then Mahathir Mohamad is no longer there, and the new Malaysian government no longer wants to. Honestly, everybody's embarrassed by Imran Khan. So the Malaysians don't want to have much to do with Imran Khan. So all you're left with is Turkey. Now, realistically, what can Turkey do? Right. So you have all of
history.
Yeah, that's all they can realistically do. And their ability to produce crappy serials, though to be fair, Turkish historical serials are they're much better produced than Indian historical serials.
Agreed.
their costume and things like that is, even though the story, the way it's portrayed, is exactly like Ekta Kapoor serials. The thing is, they don't overdress. It's historically, at least most of it, the costumes, the scenery, the settings is fairly accurate. Uh, so you have all of this happening out there. The number of Pakistan's friends has reduced so significantly. What do you have left? It was a scene of desperation, but what we need to remember is we need to be very, very careful, because Pakistan will make all these noises now. The army chief will say we need peace. Imran Khan says we need peace. They're willing to sign a ceasefire, which incidentally goes against us. Let's not forget that. We'll discuss that later. Uh, and that's it's the charade of doing something, just like it was the charade of cracking down on black money to get off the FATF blacklist. So it's the charade of uh, talking about peace. But for me, the problem is the talk doesn't matter, the action matters. Till these people start cracking down on terrorism in their soil, all talk of peace is absolute and complete codswallop. Now, if you go back, what you'll see is once peace is achieved, relations are stable and mutual trust is built up, India is more than willing to go in for territorial accommodation, like Modi achieved with Bangladesh. Right? In Bangladesh, now you've had Sheikh Hasina ruling for what, 10, 12 years now? And unlike that pendulumic process where Khalida Zia was vitriolically anti-India, Sheikh Hasina has never been anti-India. She stabilized that relationship. Of course, there'll be ups and downs in any relationship. That's fine. But the discourse in Bangladesh is no longer anti-India. And that provides the political climate for a territorial settlement where Bangladesh gained a lot more. And if you remember Modi's speech at that time, he said, look, don't be upset that we're giving up so much land. Think of it as this way, that we're gaining a friend and we're gaining a lot more in terms of trade and the benefits of trade that are going to come because of this. Right? Which is it showed the whole world that, India was willing to, that territory isn't set in stone, but it will be done on our terms. Come to us as a friend. If you're a friend, we will settle territorial disputes with you. If you try to attack us and take it away from us, screw you. Right? I think all the governments get that. And they understand that Modi is one of those few people now, because after 30 years, he has such a huge mandate. He has the power to do it also. And it isn't going to affect him electorally. Right? Far from it. They won the Assam elections after that. So it didn't really affect them at all. And they made huge gains in Bengal during the 2019 Lok Sabha elections. So it's quite... It's a combination of increased strength on the Indian part, a particularly desperate situation in Pakistan, and an increase in the power differential between the two.
But many people have pointed out that India is also under pressure because of the new Biden administration, because of what happened with China, and you don't want to fight a two-front war despite all the, uh, let's say, your doctrine about cold start and all those things. You really don't want to go to a situation where you have an actively hostile China and actively hostile Pakistan. So many people are trying to present that India is also under lots of pressure to make this peace deal.
Not really. Not really. So if you talk to the Pentagon, you'll find that there isn't much pressure to make a peace deal per se, because however compromised Biden is to Beijing, it's not going to filter into pressure on India to compromise with China. What's going to happen is you're going to see a lot of fake movements against China, or say the watering down of the anti-China agenda, like you saw in the Quad summit that discussed everything except China, the Quad Zoom conference that discussed everything except China. you're going to see a scapegoat created in Russia, where Russia is going to be made enemy number one so that they can tone down their aggression towards China. But it will never be as crude and direct as telling India to make peace with China now. We need to be very clear about that. Second, there won't be that pressure even with regards to Pakistan at the moment, because the Biden administration still hasn't decided what to do with Pakistan. Right? This offer of a ceasefire, on the other hand, was particularly ill-considered, and I'll tell you why. When India hits Pakistan, we don't use non-state elements or sub-state elements, that is to say terrorists, to hit Pakistan. We do it as one state attacking another state, wherein we send our Mirage 2000s to bomb Balakot, or we send our troops in that Uri strike. Huh. So when you sign a ceasefire, tomorrow what happens when, say, Lashkar-e-Toiba or Hizbul Mujahideen carry out a big bombing Pulwama style in Kashmir? Right. Smart move to have even accepted was done, which was mostly because we expect pressure from Biden to increase. So better to do something less costly now than to do something more costly later on, which is still smart politics. The problem that I have with that is that tomorrow when Biden tells us to do something with Pakistan, he will ask for more now. He says, okay, now you have done a ceasefire, now do some more. Whereas I think we should have just waited and then said, look, we will do a ceasefire and that's good enough for the time being. So see, policy is very complicated, right? It's always a mix and match of different things playing out. I think now if Biden asks us to do more, it should always be conditional on getting him to get Pakistan to crack down on terrorists. And by crack down, I don't mean like those, merry-go-round jails that they have, where a terror leader can actually copulate and produce kids in jail.
But the entire thing about signing a ceasefire with Pakistan is nothing new. We have been doing that since 1947, and again it comes back at us, and Pakistan is back to the original form. Even after this ceasefire announcement, there has been encounters with the terrorists in the Jammu and Kashmir. So what has actually changed? Why do we fall for it every time? Or are we also playing to the gallery? Because as I told you, that we are also under pressure to at least stabilize our northern border, because after what China did at the Galwan, we don't really want that to happen. And there are news reports that Pakistan, despite the pressure from China, did not move army at the line of control. So that also built some kind of trust.
Right. So two issues. One is we are genuinely seeing worrying signs from China, which is you're seeing a significant build up of military infrastructure and unknown infrastructure, because they're building huge underground storage. We don't know what it's for, which makes it more worrying for me, because at least if I know what's coming up, I can plan for it. If I don't know what's coming up, I don't know how to plan for it or how long it's going to take me to compensate. The problem then is that, if Pakistan and India sign a ceasefire agreement, when India, if God forbid, is in a tight spot, why do you think the Pakistanis won't break that ceasefire agreement? Right? Treaties aren't set in stone, especially treaties with Pakistan are never set in stone. Right? For all you know, they don't need to send in the army. They could just send in about 10, 15,000 mujahideen into Kashmir in a repeat of Operation Polo or whatever. Not Polo. What was the operation? Operation Gibraltar. Operation Gibraltar. Polo was Hyderabad. Gibraltar was the 65 attempt to seize Kashmir. So they'll repeat Operation Gibraltar. And then what do? because then you're still bound by the ceasefire that you can't hit Pakistan back.
Hmm.
Right. So I think on balance, it may have been a mistake signing the ceasefire, but you can understand why it was done.
Hmm. But also,
Because basically it's coming together of lots of things. One is this Chinese infrastructure. The second is, throwing a preemptive move at Biden so that he won't force you to do much, hopefully, or he might force you to do even more. It's taking a gamble. And see, that's a good thing. It's
hmm.
good to take risks because risks can sometimes boomerang, but they can sometimes pay off. That's the whole point of a risk.
Yeah, yeah, agreed, agreed.
But it shows that some good calculation has been done, even though I may not agree with the calculation. Clearly, they've done some kind of a cost benefit and they've arrived at it. So, this is more of a disagreement in terms of uh, I'm an eternal pessimist. I will always take the worst case scenario. Um, Clearly, the government has balanced worst and best case scenarios and taken that.
Hmm. Uh, but it also brings into very sharp focus the relation between India and the Gulf countries. What is the current status now? We have seen a remarkable improvement in the relations between India, UAE, Saudi Arabia, and so on, despite all those CA protest and crackdown on Hindus in the Gulf countries. We have seen that relations have actually progressed. So, how is that putting pressure on Pakistan, and what exactly is the nature of relation between India and Saudi Arabia as of now?
So, even with regards to CAA and what happened in the Gulf countries, do you remember they didn't crack down as hard as we thought they would? In fact, the royal family actually provided protection to a lot of people we know. They could have cracked down, they could have sent people to jail. Instead, all they did was, sent a few knocks on the door and said, behave yourself, and that was it. And that's quite significant given how conservative the image of the Gulf states we have and how retrograde we believe Wahhabism to be. So, for me, the CA, NRC, and the fact that the UAE especially refused to crack down on Indians deemed Islamophobic was very, very significant to me. Which really tells you the way this whole relationship is heading. Right. So, on one hand, with the UAE and Oman, we've always had very, very close ties. Oman has always been the outlier. They've never liked to play international politics. They don't want to condemn anyone. They just keep quiet, mind their own business. And Sultan Qaboos the late Sultan Qaboos in Oman was the first person to allow Hindus to build a temple in the Arabian Peninsula, which was long back. It was like 15, 20 years back or something. He allowed that to happen. And in spite of a civil war in Yemen, Oman has managed its affairs very, very well. Right? They haven't seen any fallout from that war come over into Oman and things. With the UAE, we've always had a very similar relationship. It's just never been overt because the UAE, unlike Oman, did not have a policy of neutrality. And they always wanted to follow the Saudi lead. They never wanted to alienate the Saudis. Now, the question is, why did, in a sense, Oman has done what Qatar wanted to do, except Qatar wanted to do it in a very brash, irritating way. In that sense, Qatar is a mirror image of Mehdi Hassan in Al Jazeera. Right. You can make a point, but you have to be a goddamn prick about it and a two-faced hypocritical prick about it. Whereas the Omanis have done the same thing, except they haven't made waves about it. They've just been very quiet, low-key. They don't want the visibility. They're not like the Thanis who want to be like the Mehdis of the world and, put themselves out there and do a little a public strip show in whatever. And now, because of Prince MBS, what's happened with the Saudi 180-degree turn is that you pretty much have the entire GCC in your pocket. And it's showing results. Remember this, you also have to combine this with the fact that a Sunni leader, Asaduddin Owaisi, is rising in India, who's broken past that geographical lock that contained him to just Andhra, or now Telangana. And he's expanding. And in a sense, he's also doing it entirely at the behest of the BJP. I mean, let's be clear, he's like the B team of the BJP in that sense. And that's nothing new, because the Shias of India have a long history of voting for the BJP. For the last 2-3 elections, there's been significant Shia voting for the BJP. You know, the Daudi Boras, the Sayyidna, came out and openly said vote for the BJP. And you don't dare defy him in that community. You do as he says, pretty much. Otherwise, there's all kinds of bans upon you and things like that. And the Twelver, the Jafris in Kashmir have been voting for the BJP for a long time, even though they'll never talk about it publicly. The Nurbakshias and the Shias of Ladakh have been voting for the BJP for a long time. So, you have lots of variations. The problem is we look at Muslims in India as a monolithic whole, which is so sad, because if you've noticed, the study of political Islam in India is so shallow and third rate. Even though we've had the most tactile interactions with the Muslim world for the last 1,000 years, our knowledge and study of it is the most third rate anywhere in the world.
No. The reason is that the political Islam in India is studied by the Islamists themselves, and no one dare questions it.
Exactly.
So all the people who study, who are experts, they themselves are Islamist and they are deemed secular. I mean, the Bangladesh war anniversary is going on. So just read the Urdu press coverage of Bangladesh war in Delhi, UP and Bihar. It was of admiration of the Pakistani army and the Islamists out there.
Yeah.
Anyways, continue.
It was. And remember, we always need to accept that people change over time. Okay, communities change over time, community outlooks change over time. So one of the things that I saw that I was laughing about was how people were going completely berserk with Sheikh Mujibur Rahman, because he was instrumental during Direct Action Day riots and the killing of Hindus in during the partition of India, just before the partition of India. Of course, he played a role. Everybody knows he played a role. People change. Yitzhak Rabin was the one who led the armies to a victory in 1965 against the Arabs. And he's the one that made the peace with the Arabs as well, initiated the peace with the Arabs, right? Netanyahu cracks down on Palestinians like nobody else before him. And yet he's the one that signed more peace treaties with the Arabs than anybody else. Sheikh Mujibur Rahman absolutely was responsible for Direct Action Day. But remember, he's also the one that declared a secular republic in Bangladesh, which later on, Khalida Zia's husband is the one that made it an Islamic state. Remember, people are capable of change over time. We need to understand that. You can't judge people by what they did once upon a time.
Yeah.
Right.
And so Gulf countries are also changing, right?
Gulf countries are changing. Gulf countries are changing so much. Bahrain is changing. The UAE has changed so much. They've allowed cohabitation to happen. For a boy and an unmarried girl to be living legally in a Muslim country on the Arabian Peninsula, who thought that would be legal at one point of time? If I told you this 15, 20 years back, you would have probably forcibly taken me to a psychiatrist to seek mental help. And yet it's happened today. And if this process is followed through in Saudi Arabia, God forbid anything happens to MBS, I really pray for that man's life every single day. I'm an atheist and I don't pray, but in my prayers, I always pray for MBS because, he's probably the one of the few hopes we have for taking that part forward and hopefully then for reforming the whole of Islam across the world, which is, because there were two approaches to reforming Islam. Well, three. One was the nasty Muslim Brotherhood approach, which actually wanted to go back to this imagined goody-goody period, which was actually extremely regressive and extremely violent. The second approach was, Muslim reformers who were challenging the tenets of the religion, asking for reinterpretation of the religion and things like that. And what we realized was, and this is the wisdom of the UAE that we now realize, so we will change society instead. So, it's this third stream. Let's change society and the religion will temper itself down approach, right? Which is unsurprisingly what happened in Europe. Technically, we should have been able to see that, right? It wasn't Christianity that reformed itself in Europe, because remember, the so-called Reformation, Martin Luther King is much more bloodthirsty than the Catholic Church. Martin Luther King is a vile anti-Semitic bigot. So much so that the Pope and co thought he was like a scary bigot at that point of time. And that tells you a lot when a medieval Pope thinks that somebody is an anti-Semitic bigot. Right? And what happened was, it was the Industrial Revolution that tamed Christianity. Initially, what happened was, because of the Industrial Revolution, proselytizing and Christianity became stronger till they became weaker. Right? In the late 1700s is when proselytizing, from say 1750 to 1850s, when proselytizing is at its peak, overt expressions of Christianity peak, and then it takes a backseat. And what you've seen is that same process kind of happening in Saudi Arabia and the UAE, where, remember, Saudi Arabia, despite all its wealth, was at the forefront of international jihad in Afghanistan and everywhere else. Most of the 9/11, you will see that recede. Hopefully, if we accept, and UAE has proven that the European model, the timeline of the European model, which spans 300-400 years, can be compressed into 40-50 years. Because we've seen it works in the UAE, can we realistically extrapolate that model onto Saudi Arabia? The rare optimist in me says, yes, let's see. But this is where we need to be very careful. We can't conflate democracy with social change, with religion. Social change needs to happen. It is not necessarily a democratic process. And, you can't conflate the two. That is the greatest danger you can have for the time being. Let's see where it goes.
Yes. And the final thing, Abhijit, when the Pakistani army chief made that speech about peace and all, we saw several people in India, especially on the liberal side, just went gaga over it, right? As if their dreams have come true, and they started praising Pakistan. They started denouncing Modi once again. Modi for being a warmonger, for doing Balakot and Uri strike. And this is not surprising, because these embedded journalists were also peddling Pakistani wartime propaganda during the Balakot strike. They were more than willing to play that role, and they were also demanding Nobel Peace Prize for Imran Khan. So what do you think is going to be the new propaganda in India after Pakistan is now supposedly doing something towards the peace?
Look, I really don't know, and I don't spend my time following these crackpots and cocaine heads, because let's be clear what they are. They're basically very high on cocaine or crystal meth, and I think anybody who takes them seriously really probably needs to seek psychiatric help. I don't follow these people. I don't take them seriously. I know a certain part of the
Washington Post, New York Times, Economist, all the Western media and think tank take them seriously.
They're all a bunch of, meth heads and coke heads. What do you want me to do about it?
Okay.
I can show you I actually have a video clip of an economist correspondent in India snorting cocaine. So, it's, oh yeah. So, I have very little time for these cocaine heads.
Okay, Abhijit, thank you for talking to us, and Hopefully, we will see more developments in this entire process. I hope it doesn't become a theatric and comical, like let's start cricket match with Pakistan and all those kind of crazy things. But for now, happy Holi audience and happy Holi Abhijit Iyer-Mitra. What are you
Happy
doing on
Holi
Holi?
to everyone. Play a good, solid Holi, maintain social distancing, drink lots of bhang, have very good dreams, and veil, veil, vetri veil.
Thank you and see you soon.